Hello and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MSP. This is a Ukraine War Frontline update for for the activity yesterday. This is the 2nd of April today. It's a little bit later this video today. Sorry, real life gets in the way and all that. This is the map of Ukraine as according to War Mapper. It's worth noting that he's done all the graphs that he does on a monthly basis to show the amount of territory gained and lost. So just to give you a recap of that, during the early months of the war, Russia obviously took a load of Ukrainian territory, and then the Ukrainians pushed them back, or at least they retreated from Kiev and a lot of the territory. Then they gained a little bit, and then we saw the Kharkiv and then Kherson counteroffensives and the withdrawal of the Russian troops from there. And then in the last 4 months, and we can talk about Russia's offensive, and we will dip into that in a second, there's been negligible territory gained by the Russians. It's been, as I said yesterday, really quite embarrassing. Just the second greatest army in the world has taken in the last month something like 0.01% of Ukraine's land. Now, if we dip into what the ISW says about this, and I dealt with the argument from some Russians that you hear that, there wasn't an offensive. This wasn't an offensive. The Russians didn't say they were going to do one. Well, actually, they kind of did, and I'll talk about that in a second. And also, if they're not doing an offensive, then what the hell are they doing what they've been doing for the last 7 months? And how come they've lost a real uptick in equipment over the last 3 months that coincides with, an offensive. Anyway, the ISW says Russian, Ukrainian and Western sources observed on 1st of April that the Russian winter offensive has failed to achieve the Kremlin's goals of seizing the Donetsk and Luhansk Oblast administrative borders by March 31st. They didn't take Donbass. Chief of the Russian Staff, General Staff Valery Gerasimov, had announced on December the 22nd that Russian forces were focusing most of their efforts on seizing Donetsk Oblast. And I presume he's not saying we're focusing most of our efforts on seizing Donetsk in 2026, right? It's like, that's what we're doing now. It's winter. We're going to have a winter offensive. And the Russian forces launched their winter offensive operation in early February along the Kupiansk-Kreminna Liman line and on select front lines in western Donetsk Oblast. The UK MOD observed that Gerasimov has failed to extend Russian control over Donbass during his appointment as a theatre commander in Ukraine, and has achieved only marginal gains by expending mobilized personnel. Ukrainian intelligence representative Yusov stated that Gerasimov missed the Kremlin's deadline to capture Donbass by March 31st. Russian mill bloggers have fretted that Russian forces must finish their offensive operations in Bakhmut and Avdivka to prepare for the Ukrainian counteroffensive they expect between Orthodox Easter on April the 16th and May the 9th. Mill bloggers highlighted their disappointment that there have not been any decisive battles throughout the winter and observed that Russia will not be capable of continuing large-scale offensive operation if it is unable to secure Bakhmut and Avdivka in the coming weeks. Deputy head of the main directorate of Russian National Guard, the Rosgvardia, in occupied Donetsk Oblast, Khodorkovsky, has stated that he agrees with former military commander Surovikin that Russia needs to shift to defensive positions, which means they were on offensive positions. This argument that this was not a Russian offensive is complete garbage, and it's disproven by Russian military leaders. If you're shifting to defensive positions, it means you weren't in defensive positions and you were in offensive positions, unless you're just hanging around with your thumb up your ass doing nothing. Khodorkovsky, sorry, I'm starting to get angry again. Khodorkovsky noted that failures during the offensive caused manpower losses and sparked negative sentiments among the personnel, and argued that unnamed actors may be attempting to continue the offensive for personal reasons rather than taking a rational approach to the issue. So his comment is likely implying that Gerasimov is pursuing personal interest in sustaining the offensive in order to retain favor with Russian President Putin. Khodorkovsky's recent appointment on March 30th as regional Rosgvardia deputy head and the return of Surovikin, at least by proxy, to the information space may indicate that Gerasimov's unsuccessful theatre-wide offensive may already be costing him favour with Putin. All very interesting. And growing Russian speculation about military command changes likely indicates that Russia may soon reshuffle its senior military command due to the failed winter offensive. So I think this is a really interesting time. We're going to see what this failed offensive might mean for the Russian military leadership. Right, going to the northeast, we've got the Kupiansk to Kreminna front line there. That is on my map here. Now, I've done some jigging of the map here. Syriac Maps, which is a pro-Russian mapper, says that the situation northeast front, corrections were made in Kharkiv offensive following satellite footage. He's given more land to the Ukrainians. Actually, I pretty much had that line anyway. In fact, I've adjusted my map to show the Ukrainians control slightly less land there, even though it looks to him like there are more. So I've jigged my map. I'm still not sure of Liman Pershi. I've given it to the Russians at the moment, but actually it could well still be contested grey zone there. Anyway, let's move further down south. There's been the usual kind of RSW announcements that the Russians have claimed and Ukrainians have claimed, repelled attacks around the usual Chervonopepivka, Makivka, Dubrova, Hrivka, Bilarivka, Verkhnokamianska. So that's going right down towards Bakhmut. So up and down those lines, but limited. Geolocated footage published on March the 31st and April the 1st indicated that Ukrainian forces made limited advances west of Chervonopepivka and northeast of Verkhnokamianska. Right, that's quite interesting. So let's go and have a look at this. I'm going to show you, no, that's the second one. I'm going to show you, first of all, this. So the Russians were using this gun to attack positions of the Ukrainians, and the Ukrainians were in a particular position, and the idea is that in order for the Russians to attack that position, the Ukrainians must be there. Otherwise, it's just a pointless bit of video footage. Now, the geolocation of that footage is interesting because it shows that the Russians were somewhere behind here, and that has been geolocated, and the Ukrainians are indeed right on the edge of the Russian controlled area. So this, as the RSW says, indicates that Ukrainians have made an advance towards Chervonopepivka. I haven't changed my mapping at the moment, but just bear that in mind. That's quite interesting. Now, this second video is one that I almost showed you yesterday, but I ran out of time in my extra video. This would have linked perfectly to the drone stuff I was telling you about, because this apparently was communication between drones, Ukrainian drones, and tanks, and this kind of combined arms maneuvering might not be so well. There were also infantry as well, I believe. So tankers of the Ukrainian 54th Mechanized Brigade, supported by BMP-2, attacking Russian positions near Verkhnokamianska, and that is apparently northeast of there. I will show you this footage later. It is interesting, I think, footage showing, let's put it in fast forward, showing combined arms initiative with all sorts of different stuff happening. And anyway, there's a YouTube video of the full 10 minutes of that, the full footage of the 10 minutes. Unfortunately, I haven't got a geolocation on that. I can't seem to find any geolocation, but it is, if we come down further down south, so not really much to report around this area other than repelled attacks, Bilarivka as well, but that is northeast of here. So that indicates apparent advances of the Ukrainians. So I would imagine it's going to be, somewhere along here that activity was taking place. But if you guys have time, I just don't have time this weekend. I would love today to have geolocated this. It would be relatively easy because there's quite a lot of video footage here. It's on Military Land Net on YouTube, and also if you look on militaryland.net on Twitter for a truncated version of that, you should be able to geolocate that quite easily. I'd love to know where that is, and I'll put it on my map. I just don't have time today. So that's a little bit of homework for peeps, right? Okay, so let's now move on to Bakhmut. No really quiet day, actually, otherwise, along the whole front lines, as it's been for 4 or 5 days now, hinting at a culmination of the Russian forces. Apparently, repelled attacks around the Orikovo, Vasilivka area here. We have the other thing I forgot to say is that Cherevati, the Ukrainian Eastern Group Forces spokesperson, has said that most of the people making up the Russian forces in that Kupiansk to Liman direction are mobilized personnel. But anyway, so when it comes to Bakhmut, the RSW says Russian forces did not make any confirmed gains in or around Bakhmut yesterday. Now, Syriac Maps does make some claims about gains in the area. So if we go back to Syriac Maps, let's just show you what they say about the gains in Bakhmut. So in the northern area, really tying up the knots with regard to the Azom steelworks plant, and then a tiny bit of ground to the west of that, and some to the east by that car parking lot that we had some geolocated footage at last week. Around so there is that. Troops advance in new areas around the Azom industrial complex and are close to take Bakhmut railway station 1. So that is a railway station that comes down there. And then it goes on to say in the south of the Bakhmut city, they made advances trying to encircle the council hall, and troops began advancing in the area south of Bakhmutska Street following the Ukrainian withdrawal from around there. So there are some gains sort of south and east of Bakhmut, or southeast of Bakhmut there. So going back to the ISW, there were 25 combat clashes in the Bakhmut area, so that's not a great amount considering what we have seen in the past. The tempo of Russian assaults continues to decrease compared to 2 weeks ago. Russian mill bloggers claim that Wagner Group fighters conducted assault operations in the southern and northern parts of Bakhmut and are gradually breaking through Ukrainian defenses in the southern and southwestern parts of the city. A Russian mill blogger claimed that Russian forces operating in Bakhmut have become apathetic to the deaths of their comrades. Interesting that that's now starting to come out from Russian sources. A Russian mill blogger claimed that they conducted an unsuccessful assault in the north towards Orikovo-Vasylivka. That's basically the long and the short of it. War Mapper shows no change. ISW says no confirmed change. Syriac Map does say changes. And just to let you know what's going on with my map, so Deep State Map, which is a pro-Ukrainian mapper, has shown a big increase around here. They didn't have the Azom plant under control of the Russians, but now has updated that to fall in line with Syriac Map. So actually, so the yellow map is the pro-Ukrainian Deep State Map, and the red lines are the pro-Russian Syriac maps. And actually, they have started to align themselves much more than they have over the last couple of days in this northern and northeastern area. You can see it's much closer. Still a little bit different in the south and south. Well, actually, the southeast has aligned a bit better, but this whole pocket here is Russians control as according to the Russian mappers, but not as according to Ukrainian mapper there. And then they're starting to align a little bit more over here, but still it shows that the Russians are much more generous for the Russian advances around the football stadium just south of there, and north of Kuryskoho Street there. Maripolska Street as well has more activity. A little baby poking at me through the window. Hello. We've got family around, so I better wrap this up fairly soon. So Maripolska Street as well. There's the Russian gains there, as according to the pro-Russian mappers. But if we come down further down south, it's no changes here. We look at Poulet Volon's map, who is a I assume pro-Ukrainian mapper, but I don't know, to be honest. We have this very rare yellow arrow in this time of Russian offensive, and the red arrows all around Bakhmut. No, that's not the acrobatic Air Force team of the RAF. It is literal red arrows. Some to the north, a few to the south, but actually not too much movement. That gain of the Ukrainians to the west of Ivanivska, southwest of Ivanivska, I've already shown, but they have the Russian controlled line actually quite far south in comparison to what it was. So if you have a look, so if we go back to Poulet Volant, you've got that little lip there. So that's there. So I think they've got the Russian controlled lines across there. So that's much less than I've got, but I would go out on a limb and say that I think the Russian lines probably are along there. And I think they have been pushed back. This is where the Ukrainians have really been concentrating, rather than in the city, they've been concentrating on giving a buffer zone to their main supply routes in and out of Bakhmut. And I'm not sure about this area to the west of the canal that Syria map has, but no pro-Ukrainian mappers have. But anyway, that's what's going on in Bakhmut. Let's look at, in a general sense, let's look at a couple of explicit details. I shared this with you in the news video I did this morning. This is a huge hit on the Azom, one of the big buildings of the Azom plant. So I'll just play this out. Give me a chance to have a cuppa. I do love a bit of Ukrainian. Oof. But so the significance of that is it's a very big explosion. Some in my threads are saying it looks more like sort of booby trap or explosions from within, but apparently that's a Tochka U, a big bit of missile hitting that plant, as well as there's footage of tagged onto some of the videos of that happening. There's video of a railway bridge or bridge over the railway being blown very nearby. So just to show you where that is on my map, looks like one of these buildings, possibly that building there, was hit, and then this bridge here was hit, and that's going to affect the supply of the Russians into to their forces in northern Bakhmut. Now, the significance of taking that whole building out is that it's highly likely, I would suggest, that Russians will have accumulated troops there. It would be seen as a safe place to keep your troops, because they would just be expecting bog standard artillery to be hitting that, and not a big Tochka U missile. Also, you know, if the Ukrainians are being super, I'm not saying lucky, but if they timed this, the likelihood is they would have timed that missile to be the most effective it could be in terms of having accumulations of troops, or someone like Prigozhin or leaders there as well. And if they have that kind of intel, then it would be no surprise if they've hit that with those people there. Now, I'm not saying those people were there, but there is talk about this being a high value hit. So you could expect that to have caused the Russians a really serious headache in hitting that, both literally and metaphorically. Okay, so moving on to a few other bits and pieces around there. So I showed you footage the other day of ammunition strike, or a truck with ammunition and other vehicles being hit in Avdivka. There's another dump that has been hit, ammunition dump that's been hit in Avdivka as well. That was the previous one from a different angle, and that is another ammunition dump near the football ground in Avdivka. So that has happened. I showed you this video this morning talking about precision strikes. So this is the sort of thing that happens, which is drones seeing people going to buildings, and then once they're in there, hitting them with precision artillery. Although it does hit the side part there rather than the central part. I don't know if that was less effective, or that's where the people were, who knows. But anyway, that was hit. And just to give you a little indication of what the conditions have been, there's been a huge amount of snow falling in the area. That's going to turn into mud, but snow and mud is particularly difficult. So here we've got a Ukrainian Humvee stuck in the Bakhmut area, luckily being able to be pulled out by an IFV there, an infantry fighting vehicle. Remember, that's like an APC, an armored personnel carrier, but with a gun on top, or some kind of armament on top. So that IFV has pulled out Humvee. Just I showed you this only to give you an indication of what the conditions are like now, and with the idea that they are likely to get worse in terms of maneuverability around Bakhmut. So anyway, that is Bakhmut. Incidentally, I've got nothing from Rebar, the pro-Russian source, on Telegram, so they've obviously taken a day off. So I would go from Bakhmut now down to Avdivka. So as we move down south, we move past Toretsk, New York, and come to Bakhmut 2.0, or Avdivka as it is known. It's worth looking at. So if we go back to the War Mapper map, they've actually got an Avdivka map as well, not that way, but this way. And on this map, they show that Ukrainians have made some gains south of Avdivka. They've pushed part of the Russian line back in the area of Siverny and Vodyanye. There's been supposed footage of lots of Russian mechanized equipment being taken out near Vodyanye. I was questioning exactly whether that was new or from a few days before the stuff that I'd already shown you. That was what I was talking about yesterday. But suffice to say that over the last week, there's been quite a lot of activity around there in terms of taking out Russian equipment. The Russians have been trying to make their gains to the north in the Krasnohorivka and Novobakhmutivka area. So let's pop along to the ISW to see what they've accumulated. They don't give too much other stuff other than, repelled, attacked, unsuccessful offensives around Novobakhmutivka, Avdivka itself, Siverny, Pervomaisky, and includes Marinka as well. Stepovo, Keramik, all these kind of places where they're assaulting, but no sort of confirmed changes of territory control. Russian forces continue offensive south and southwest of Kamyanka. That's interesting. They're saying south and southwest because that might indicate that they control Kamyanka. I don't have confirmation over that. There are Russian sources. Rebar over the last week has been saying that the Russians control Kamyanka, but as far as I know, it is not. I don't have that confirmed by multiple sources. Let's have a look at what the War Mapper map says. So Kamyanka for them is still under Ukrainian control. Now, there's quite a lot of footage to suggest Avdivka's been absolutely hammered over the last 24 hours from artillery and rocket attacks. These are administrative buildings, council buildings in Avdivka, really under a lot of pressure from that kind of Russian activity. But other than that, not too much else to go through in Avdivka. That claim from the War Mapper is not confirmed as far as I can see elsewhere. So I haven't changed my maps, but expect that possibly the Ukrainians have taken back some territory south of Siverny. And then as we come down further south along past another Krasnohorivka to Marinka, it's the same again. No explicit details, same as it's been the last couple of days. Don't really know exactly what's going on in this area and who controls what there. The Ukrainian mappers and Russian mappers sort of disagree. Syriac Maps has the Russians in control of Russians in control of the northerly part of Marinka, as well as the agriculture area even further northwest than that. The ISW, as I've already mentioned, just says fighting in Marinka, just mentions it as that. And Russian forces occupied the Marinka administration building, according to a Russian source, but ISW has not observed visual confirmation of that claim. Now, I don't know if that refers to, I need to look into that, but it could be referring to that area here that the Russians took control of this last week, as according to Syriac Maps, but I haven't really seen that reflected in many other places. So that could be ISW reflecting that claim in their daily report. Right, let's then move on further down south. Let's just talk about it here. So Russian forces did not conduct any confirmed ground attacks in western Donetsk, so outside of Avdivka. Nothing else really going on, apart from geolocated footage on the 31st shows Russian forces firing incendiary munitions on Vuhledar, and I shared that with you yesterday. And the Russian forces apparently repelled a Ukrainian reconnaissance force operation in unspecified area of western Donetsk. So in other words, if we're talking about western Donetsk, that's going to be somewhere around here, or possibly even in the Vuhledar Preshchivka area here. So who knows? But anyway, that is all for there, because there, as I said, we have seen a very quiet number of days on the front lines right across the board. And even in Bakhmut, where it's the hottest at the moment, if you like, there's only 20 odd repelled attacks there, which is relatively low compared to what we have seen over the recent past. Let's see what else ISW has to say. And the answer to that query is not a lot. So it talks a lot about how the Russians are building their defenses still. Something they're consistently reporting on. That Brady Afric on Twitter and elsewhere on the internet has a really good mapping of the fortifications that the Russians have been building. And it just says Russian forces conducted routine shelling along in Zaporizhia and Kherson Oblast, and that's literally all the news. So that's effectively the end of the Frontline update for today. There might be some movements up there up in the northerly area near Kreminna for the Ukrainians, possibly around Verkhnok that place just south of Kreminna as well. Otherwise, Bakhmut, the Russians seem to still be closing that net, but also being pushed back north and south, or at least held back north and south, and pushed back in the south. So that would allow, my opinion is still that the Ukrainians are fine with conceding some of the territory here, ceding some of the territory of Bakhmut to the Russians at the expense that the Russians are paying for that territory, in the knowledge that if they keep these supply routes open, they can do an operation withdrawal at a quicker rate if they need to. That I really think that to me it looks like this has actually been quite well managed by Ukraine, and lots of people say, "Oh, too many people are dying, etc., etc." But actually, what they're doing, pinning the Russian forces here, biding time, fixing them while the counteroffensive is getting ready. They appear to have enough forces here to rotate troops in and out of Bakhmut. It is difficult, of course, it's difficult, and of course, there are lots of troops dying. But as long as the Russians are dying at excessive quantities compared to the Ukrainians, then that is a calculation that works in the Ukrainians' favor. And they're degrading the Russian forces while keeping lines of communication, G-locks open, ground lines of communications or main supply routes open so that they can do an operational withdrawal if they need, and they can get reinforcements and ammunition in if they need, even if it is very difficult. And there's still these theories and claims that they are using tunnels to get in from Chasiv Yar to Bakhmut. So I'm starting to come around to the idea that actually it probably was the right idea to hold on to Bakhmut. But I guess time will tell, and I wouldn't put my mortgage on that. But that would be my assessment at the moment. And everywhere else is fairly quiet. Well, Avdivka is obviously pretty tasty at the moment, but the Russians seem to have been held back now, and the question is, have they exhausted themselves there as well? Anyway, thank you for watching. Please like, subscribe, and share. Really appreciate all your support. You are all amazing. Well, most of you are amazing. Some of you, a little bit iffy. But no, really appreciate the time you spend on my channel and all the support you give to it. Take care, and I'll speak to you soon.